The COVID-19 pandemic has reduced Georgia's economic dependence on other countries, including Russia. In 2020, Georgia's economy depended on Russia mainly through foreign trade and remittances. Particularly high dependence was observed in the export of Georgian wine and the import of Russian wheat. Georgia is less dependent on Russian electricity and gas. Moreover, Russian investments in Georgia are small.
Kuratio International Foundation and Galton Taggart have presented a joint report on the Georgian healthcare sector, which assesses the financial condition of the hospital sector. The document reports that the universal healthcare program is carried out with overspending every year. The organizations estimated that the overspending of the universal healthcare program has totaled about 350 million in 7 years, which is 8% more compared to the approved budget.
In the fourth quarter of the 2020, the average monthly nominal earnings in Georgia decreased by 0.4% or 5 GAL compared to the same quarter of the previous year and amounted to 1,314 Georgian lari.
The value of domestic exports of Georgia has dropped by 16.2% in January 2021 as compared to the same period of the prior year, with USD 8.5 million wine in the fourth top exported product from Georgia during January 2021, following nitrogenous fertilizers, which has dropped by 49.1%. Wine became the second by the largest decline in value as compared to January 2020.
Hello, and this is The Checkpoints, anchored and co-authored by Elena Kvangilashvili, good evening Elena, and myself. I'm Georgi Sakadze, and we're here in the Forbes Georgia studio to tell you more about business and economics.
10 p.m. sharp, Sunday, it is definitely time for the checkpoints. The rollout of AstraZeneca vaccine in Georgia continues. The statistics that are available at this point show that up to 4,000 medical staff have already been vaccinated and 5,000 more are already registered to take their first jabs. Unfortunately, Georgia witnessed one fatal case when 27-year-old nurse Megi Barbakadze fell into what's presumed to be an anaphylactic shock and passed away. We are very sorry, and once again, not only from the Forbes Georgia Health platform, but also from the checkpoints, urge all responsible for more active information campaigns, not only about misinformation with the vaccine, but also about the rules and expectation management with vaccination. One thing to say here, Georgi, is that Georgia did not stop the process of vaccination, which was a very wise and, let's say, bold decision in this situation. And the reason for that was the final verdict on AstraZeneca that came earlier from the toughest EU regulator, EMA, that said that the vaccine's benefits basically outweigh the risks that might be associated with it. And also one more point here, and then on to you, Georgi. After the tragic case, the health ministry said that from now onwards, vaccination will take place only in multifunctional, multi-profile medical institutions. What caused the fatal case and what its connection is with the vaccination is yet to be studied and presented. But again, it is up to any person to decide. But what we see globally is that if we want to end this pandemic and go back to a normal situation like we used to be, then vaccination seems the only right way.
By the way, Elena, I had a chance for a brief conversation, brief talk with a distinguished doctor, David Mrelashvili, who lives and works in the US and who contributed 3 refrigerators that could accommodate Pfizer vaccine to Georgia free of charge. We did not have this fatal case when the interview was conducted, and let me say that the focus of this interview is to underline that the health sector is a very large, diverse sector which is developing quite dynamically, and it is really important to be in line with this development. Fortunately, we have very bright examples like Mr. Mrelashvili, for example. I will be introducing in just a moment who have reached success abroad, and even though they are far away from Georgia, they are still a very strong shoulder for our system as well. I think we should be talking more and showcasing more of these people, so that it becomes apparent we have more than enough expertise for dealing with health issues. With Mr. Mrelashvili, we talked about many things, but the focus to you just mentioned a while ago about the proper communication and the need for the proper informational campaign also came up during the conversation. As I said, this interview is more about the perspective of the medicine going forward and how to respond to challenges that arise on this road. We can follow and watch the full interview together.
Thank you so much for your time, pleasure, and our privilege to host you on our show, The Checkpoint. So could you brief us about the latest updates of yours in Georgia? What are you doing so far? We are aware about some initiatives performed personally from you, your personal involvement here. And so where do we stand so far now, David?
Thank you very much, Georgi, first of all, for the interview. Well, let me briefly tell about myself. I am a Georgia-born Georgian neurologist who has been doing telemedicine or teleneurology for the last 10, 12 years, almost as a full-time job in the last 7 years. And my involvement in Georgia especially accelerated during the pandemics. One thing I realized that I had this luxury because I have a distant job. I'm actually right now in Puerto Rico and seeing patients in 26 states all over the country. I realized I could.
Puerto Rico now.
Yes, actually, yeah, it's actually that's where my main house is. It's
Wow.
The weather is about 30 degrees Celsius. It's beautiful beach outside. So yes, I know a lot of people don't realize, but Puerto Rico is like a territory of the U.S. It's a U.S. jurisdiction. It's a federal territory, so it's kind of.
Sure,
Yeah, it's kind of a nice place to be. So I thought that if I'm doing it from Puerto Rico, I could do it from Georgia, and I did. And one thing that COVID-19 pandemic did is that it really accelerated need for the distance medical care for two reasons. One, most importantly, because we're dealing with infection. And if you are in the same room with a person, doctor, patient, well, there's a risk of transmission. The second part was the efficiency. There was so many patients coming at you that you had to figure out the most efficient way to treat all of them. And getting in the car and driving to a different part of the town is not the efficient way. So telemedicine really shined here. As a matter of fact, even all around the world and in the US, the telemedicine businesses just skyrocketed. And you know, this is a business show. Anybody can look at so many different stock options for telemedicine companies. They're just one of the best performers.
You're covering more than 220 clinics in US.
Yes.
You were involved, you participated, you contributed a lot in Georgia. Where Georgia stands in these regards, and what are perspectives of telemedicine and the culture itself? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was pleasantly surprised when I arrived in Georgia and I examined the situation by the fact that, well, because last time I was in Georgia for a prolonged time for business was more than 17, 20 years ago, something like that. And there's a huge progress since then in medical field, including telemedicine. Telemedicine companies such as Ekimo, such as RedMed already existed, and they were already seeing patients even before COVID. So everything just got accelerated, and they just got, you know, a lot more use of the technology than before. My role here was probably also similar, to kind of boost the usage of telemedicine in the country, especially for the COVID patients who were getting treatment at home. Because we all know that during the peak, every country experienced the shortage of the hospital beds. So as many patients as possible had to stay at home and be under the monitoring of a physician. So that's exactly where I came in and helped the local online clinic in Kakheti region to optimize the system so that one senior doctor could supervise hundreds and sometimes even over 1,000 patients at a time by the help of a necessary ancillary staff, junior doctors, and some graduating med students.
David, and it still goes on. Besides, we have a rather positive, I'm a bit smashed. I'm a bit smashed in regards of terminology of COVID, positive and negative. We have positive statistics in these regards. We have much better situation right now. But are you still involved? And your counterparts here in Georgia, I'm talking about health organizations, and I'm talking about pharma companies or just businesses. Are they still interested and motivated to promote telemedicine as a culture and as an effective tool in this regard?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the project continues. It does not have as much, though, thankfully, as you said, it does not have as much business in the COVID part because of the pandemics is getting better, but they are still functioning very similar way, just a reduced scale. There was a conversation, and I was the initiator. I mean, like, well, maybe because this was kind of like an emergency project, and you don't typically, unless the system is well tested and kind of mainstream, you don't continue the emergency project that was just created within days, continue indefinitely. But apparently it's working for them, for Geo Hospital in Georgia, in Kakheti region, working so well that they themselves asked to continue that, and they do continue. Of course, I have a daily contact with the team. I'm on the same channels, messaging channels as they are. If they have any questions, I answer, and I think it's just, one happy family right now. So.
Correct. David, you had also you've been linked. You delivered the message to another certified company within US. It's Moderna, and you just requested additional information, and you sent the message to deliver as soon as possible. As soon as possible, you've been asking the company to deliver specific vaccine to Georgia. They responded in few days or hours. I don't actually remember that. And
couple days, yeah. Mm-hmm,
yeah. It was just And where is that? And do you still have online contact with them in these regards of vaccines?
Right. Yeah. So needless to say that right now getting a vaccine in the world is probably the bigger challenge than anything else, any other activity. So any progress there is great. My approach is that they came online. They're contacting with me as well as with the Georgian government. I'm picking the private sector. So they got in contact with Georgia government. They're taking care of their channels. I'm trying to approach it from the private channel and kind of push the buttons of the U.S. company, given how much of a loyal partner Georgia is for the U.S. in many other aspects in the region. We're actually not many people know this, but we're contributing more soldiers per capita to fight for the U.S. in Afghanistan than any other country in the world, not just the region. Sorry, yeah. So those kind of facts, like we're putting our lives of our people for the Americans. And I think it's reasonable to ask them, because U.S. is obviously the strongest country in the world, and they already have enough vaccines by the month of May to cover the population. And by the way, not all the population is going to be vaccinated, because a lot of people are already like, we don't want it. They have U.S. is right now sitting on tens of millions of vaccine doses that are not used. So I think very soon the race will start. Hey, who's going to get those tens of millions of vaccines? And if we can get 50,000 out of the 10 million, because hey, we're such a good younger brother for the U.S. That's the approach I'm having, and trying to lobby it with the government of the U.S. and the Congress, and just whatever is within my jurisdiction of an individual, doctor or a private party.
Private. Okay, right, David. All the vaccines need specific infrastructure allocated. I cannot call that there is the same Third World War in these regards for infrastructure as in vaccines, but it's still in much deficit. But you managed to deliver 2 refrigerators for Kakhetia region, and one of them is located already in Lugar laboratory in Tbilisi. If you could be so kind to share, how did you manage to do so? Because the period when the specific refrigerators for Pfizer vaccine, I want to highlight this, was delivered to Georgia was, if I remember, it was December, correct?
Actually it was, I think initially it was January, then it moved to February to move the
February.
to bring the to bring the vaccines. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Which means that yeah, it was. How did you manage to deliver it?
Well, first of all, I do have some experience in how do I say, international purchases of medical equipment. Let's put it that way
Okay.
broadly. I've done it many years ago for Georgia for other equipments, and when I heard that Pfizer was vaccine was coming, my first question, of course, went off. Okay, do we have enough storage? Then I did hear the our NCDC director and deputy director saying, "Hey, we do have 6 refrigerators, and 3 will be stationed in, or 4 in Tbilisi, 1 in Batumi, 1 in Kutaisi." And my immediate question was like, there will be so
Where
many
is Kakheti?
people.
What about Kakheti?
Yeah, exactly. Not only that, but there will be so many people. For them, the deciding factor would be that they cannot go to Tbilisi or from everywhere from Western Georgia to Kutaisi. Some people live somewhere. So I said, like, well, it would only help if you had a little bit more refrigerators and a little bit more places. So one, of course, was going to be Kakheti. Sorry, I'm too biased. And the other one, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of the Lugar director, but I think he was planning to put in one of the Western Georgia strategic points when the Pfizer vaccine arrives. So it's easier. It's basically ease of access determines the amount of vaccination as well. As far as how I manage it, I examined all the different avenues, starting from the Georgian distributors. There's actually companies that bring in those fridges in Georgia, and they gave me a fairly, I think they said 105 days. I'm like, wait, the pandemic's going to be over by that time. Then I called European companies, and they don't sell them. And it was going to be longer. Then I called China, and they said they had it in the stock, and they said we'll ship it out right now. But we don't know how long the shipment is going to take. It could be, whatever. The Chinese New Year was coming up, and there's all kinds. It's a long story. I want to make it short. So the way I managed, I kind of, I don't want to say the confidential details, but I got in touch with the director of Hire, the firm Hire for European region, who does the sales, and we kind of made the deal that a couple of the refrigerators that were originally already arrived with a ship from China to Europe and in the port at the Netherlands, and they were unloading it. So we just took 2 and took to Georgia with the help of a Georgian shipping company, a truck that was traveling in Europe and picking up some other stuff. So they went up from Germany to Netherlands and then came back and came to Georgia in a week, on the truck. So it was a fun story. I actually had some other plan. If that didn't work, I had more plan B and C, but it worked. So, but vaccine that didn't arrive. So bummer.
I hope something similar will work for vaccines as well. Crossing fingers. David, my last question is about vaccines themselves. There's a bit difficult situation in Georgia in these regards. In my understanding, because of the vaccination process itself, which is on the first term for the medicians, for the representatives of the industry themselves, statistic in this regard is crucial. It's tragic personally for me. I mean, the activity is quite low. It's getting better and more positive daily, but it's still, the activity for the vaccination is very low. What the reason? It's because of this story with AstraZeneca, or it's some sort of general attitude on your perspective? How do you see the problem itself?
I think there is 2 kinds of population. One is general population, part of which is just against vaccines, period. I think the problem there is proper information. Again and again, I think what we need to do is not to criticize them, but teach them. This is why it's good, et cetera, et cetera. I think the contingent that you're referring to is the doctors. In their case, fortunately and thankfully, it's mostly specifically about AstraZeneca. In general, I think almost 99.9% of doctors realize and agree that vaccines are one of the 3 biggest inventions in medicine. Okay, the other one being one of them is antibiotics. So I think that's the part of, and I would say it's not the majority; it's relatively small portion. They're concerned about this possible side effects of AstraZeneca. Again, the trick here is in proper obtaining the correct information and having a correct analysis of the information. Very briefly, I will say that the main reason why these European countries held vaccination process or interrupted it for a couple of weeks was a possible thrombotic complication of the vaccine. For me, that possibility ended when I looked at the mathematical models, and the probability of AstraZeneca vaccine-related thrombosis was less than in general population. So it actually, people make a joke that it protects you from thrombosis. Well, that's too loud, but at least it doesn't predispose you. And the other part that most people don't realize, and it was less advertised in the media, is that Pfizer vaccinated population had a little bit more incidence of thrombosis than the AstraZeneca one. So I just don't understand. I mean, there has to be an alternative motive, and I don't want to create or fuel the conspiracy theories. We're not going to go there, but it has to be an alternative explanation why they are saying we're holding AstraZeneca, not the medical, not the scientific one. That's my opinion.
David, thank you so much. Keep safe, and thank you so much for everything what you're doing for Georgia and what you're doing for your country. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great talking with you, Georgi.
Very interesting, Georgi. And when we are talking about disseminating proper information, COVID-19 vaccination process, and boosting the motivation of people to contribute to the overall immunity against the pandemic, it is almost impossible not to mention former US presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Jimmy Carter, who feature in national ad campaigns in a bid to boost shaky public confidence in COVID-19 vaccines, which is a global problem and not only a case in Georgia, of course. Donald Trump, who, as U.S. media reports, was vaccinated in secret after previously claiming he was immune to the virus and takes credit for the vaccine's development, was the only living former U.S. president not to participate. But anyway, here is a very cool video featuring almost all former presidents united to give the most important message nowadays. It's up to you. Get vaccinated.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans, and soon they will be available to everyone.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
I want to go back to work, and I want to be able to move around.
To visit with Michelle's mom, to hug her and see her on her birthday.
You know what I'm really looking forward to is going to opening day in Texas Ranger Stadium with a full stadium.
We've lost enough people, and we've suffered enough damage.
In order to get rid of this pandemic, it's important for our fellow citizens to get vaccinated.
I'm getting vaccinated because we want this pandemic to end as soon as possible.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
So roll up your sleeve and do your part.
This is our shot.
Now it's up to you.
And it is reassuring and motivating, isn't it?
Definitely, 100%.
Yeah. I know that vaccination will be one topic of your exclusive interview with Mercedes Vera Martin, who sat down with the checkpoints, especially with Elena, after concluding her term in Georgia as the mission head of International Monetary Fund. Just to warn here our viewers and followers that we will have a chance to watch your interview just right after, okay?
After the checkpoints.
Yeah, after the checkpoints.
Thank you, Georgi, for this introduction.
But we had a chance to have a small piece in Georgian just this morning.
Of course, in Forbes Week. Yeah. In Forbes Week, where you teased it.
I did.
Teased it already. And thank you for this introduction as well. Of course, hope our viewers and followers find the conversation with Mercedes Vera Martin interesting. And let's now move to some economy, some industry talks, which we decided to initiate in the checkpoints, which seems to me a quite interesting idea. And let's see how that works.
Yes, Elena, the niche of providing the full picture on certain and hopefully, I mean, all industries in Georgia seems to be free to this point, and I do believe that our idea will work. Which industry shall we focus on just for tonight?
I thought this could be an industry that showed quite a resilience during the pandemic, and that's the milk industry. What's your thoughts on that?
Why not? That's quite interesting sector with quite developed players on the market?
Yes, and this is already reflected in official statistics, Georgi. Despite the pandemic year in 2020 compared to 2019, figures for milk production in Georgia have actually improved, grown by 10 million liters, which means that it has been boosted by 1.17%. Let's take a look at the dynamics of this sector.
Milk production in Georgia increased in 2020. According to preliminary data published by Geostat, last year the country produced a total of 572.5 million liters of milk, which is 10 million liters, or 1.17% more than in 2019. The increase in milk production is linked to the rise in the livestock of imported cattle, increasing productivity, says the Association of Dairy and Dairy Producers, which explains that today the country has a high price policy for milk, which is due to a milk shortage. The association also notes that last year proved difficult for the sector.
The economy has slowed down. Sales have decreased significantly. This is because tourism has stopped entirely. Therefore, the influx of visitors has been significantly reduced, and logically, sales have been incredibly low.
As for businesses, despite the increased milk production in 2020, large or medium-sized companies still faced problems as consumer demand for milk and milk products decreased. Issues with sales decline were caused by the lack of tourism and the disappearance of HoReCa sector activities. The largest producer and seller of dairy products in Georgia is Sante GMT Products. Revenue from sales in 2019 for this company was 84 million lari. The second largest player in the dairy market is Wimbil from Georgia, which is represented by the Soplis Nobati brand. The company's revenue from the sales of dairy products in 2019 was 58 million lari. Due to the lack of tourism, the problems are discussed on one of the largest dairy and dairy processing plants in the country, Sante, where last year is considered the year of the best way out of a bad situation. The company's expectations for 2021 are also pessimistic, as they do not expect the purchasing power of customers to recover this year either. Also, in case of a sharp devaluation of the national currency, price adjustments are not ruled out this year either.
We are ready to face an extremely difficult situation. First of all, we do not expect the overall situation to improve significantly in the first, second, and third quarters. I'm not talking about factors such as reopening of public transportation. Of course, this is important, but restarting the economy and tourism is even more essential. We do not expect a high number of tourists this summer because there are no clear preconditions for that yet.
Shiraki, which has its own farm in addition to production, notes that the company saw a 30% drop in sales last year. The reasons are the same here as in other businesses. In addition, the founder of the company focuses on components needed to increase the amount of raw milk in the country and reduce the number of cases of counterfeiting.
For several years, at least for 3 years, VAT should be removed on lactic acid products made from raw milk, such as the example of cheese. As for the Mazzoni issue, the law has been passed and the law must be enforced. The use of organic milk in the making of Mazzoni must expand, which will increase the demand. The topic of etiquette must also be enforced, which is mandatory for everyone.
CSAME talks about a dramatic 40% increase in prices for various raw materials imported for cattle feed. However, despite the increase in prices for products and raw materials, the company still manages to keep prices unchanged at this stage. The reason for this is that the consumer perceives the increase in prices for primary consumer goods as painful.
In 2020, we actually increased sales. We had a 40% increase despite the COVID reality. We have grown through several events, promotions, networking, and the expansion of product varieties.
As we have seen, the dairy sector has faced many important challenges, and the year 2020 has definitely worsened the situation. The future plans of the companies are vague at this stage, as large or medium-sized market players are waiting for the economy to fully open up and for the situation to stabilize.
And now that we know the dynamics of the milk sector, let's take a look at quite a large and developed player on this market. What's more, the farm you will be watching in a while meets all the international standards, which on the other hand is a very good example to follow. Meet Lasha Papashvili, a Georgian businessman, entrepreneur, and his firm.
This is Gvareli Shed. Started with 132 cattle, the farm today counts about 2,000 Holstein cows. The farm produces 32,000 liters of milk daily. Several millions of dollars have been invested in the company so far. Our host, Lasha Papashvili, is a businessman who owns Gvareli Shed. He tells us that he has been spending 2 days a week in Gvareli for years now. There is a lot to do on the farm, but Papashvili says that the most vital resource is the team. The company employs about 100 locals. The Jewish model farm is built on 21 hectares.
The first shed for cows we built was of the European type. When it came to purchasing fuel equipment, I found myself in Israel and discovered that they are the masters of the world's farming industry. When the management we hired arrived from Israel, they advised us that the European model would not work in this climate. Georgian scientists, specialists in the field of agriculture, were against it, but now they have changed their views.
Today, Gvareli Shed owns a total of 450 hectares of land, which mainly produces food needed to feed cattle. There are mills and bunkers on the farm. Here you will find a ventilation system to keep the cattle in cool temperature. There is also a pedicure machine, as the poor conditions of the hooves can affect milk and even the animal's ability to reproduce. The heart of the farm, as Lasha Papashvili says, is a fully automated milking parlor. Gvareli Shed is already 8 years old. For the first 6 years, the farm was run by a Jewish manager who brought in technology, shared knowledge, and is now limited to online consultations from Israel. According to Lasha Papashvili, the main obstacle to the development of industrial milk production are the lack of knowledge, the problem of access to finance, fragmented lands, and inadequate attention from the state.
We can attract a lot of foreign direct investment. Investors know that it is good field. Investors understand that if there is a state support, the field can be profitable. Our main customers are the 3 largest milk processors in this country: Sante, Soplis Nobati, and AgroHub.
Official statistics show that milk production in Georgia has been declining since 2014. It started to increase in 2018 and exceeded 572 million liters last year, although about 1/5 of the milk produced falls on intensive production farms such as Gvareli Shed. The fact that local milk production does not meet the country's food consumption is well illustrated by Geostat's food balances. While in 2019 local production was 562 million liters, the consumption of daily products reached 678,000 tons. Demand is growing from year to year. Therefore, the imbalance between local production and demand in the dairy industry, as well as in other sectors, is offset by imports. Consequently, millions are spent on importing both milk and milk powder. It was the challenges of milk production that motivated Lasha Papashvili to establish a branch association that would unite a number of industrial farms in the country. The name has already been coined, the National Union of Milk Producers. If, in recent years, Papashvili has demanded the exemption of dairy products from VAT but has not received it, he will now have other requirements on behalf of the industry.
We will apply definitely to the new Prime Minister to subsidize the sector and attract investment. The state should be interested in this field. The price that we should talk about is around 20 tetri. Considering the current exchange rate, 20 tetri is the minimum we can ask to encourage the industry.
There's always a way, or so they say. The National Union of Milk Producers will officially be registered, and the leading industrial milk producers will raise questions about various issues and apply directly to the Prime Minister.
Georgi, I suggest to do a brief overview for our viewers and followers of what expectations and scenarios National Bank of Georgia, our central bank, has in regards to the main economic parameters such as economic growth, inflation, foreign exchange rate, and unemployment, everything that is affected by the pandemic so far. So I think it will be interesting what is the forward-looking analysis.
You're the boss, Elena. I'm in. Let me just focus on economic growth. And according to the baseline forecast, real GDP will increase by 4% in 2021. From the beginning of 2022 as the pandemic-related global containment measures are lifted and the uncertainty dissipates. So external demand and investment activity will significantly improve, resulting in 5% real GDP growth. As for the positive scenario, 2021 will register 5% of economic growth, 2022 will follow up with 6%, and 2023 will return to 5% of economic growth. As for the pessimistic scenario, due to the epidemiological picture, the economy will grow only at 1% in 2021, and in 2022 growth will amount to 3%.
As for the lari exchange rate, NBG's baseline scenario tells us that this year's exchange rate will stay at its current level. Georgian lari USD exchange rate will also stay stable. In the positive scenario, this rate will appreciate by 5%. In the negative scenario, the depreciation stands at 10%. In this case, NBG's baseline scenario is more positive than when we heard from Standard & Poor's Global that lari would devalue against the dollar in the baseline scenario already up to like 3.5 Georgian lari. That's what Standard & Poor's told us in an exclusive interview by the end of this year already.
Yeah, the picture regarding inflation based on the outlooks provided by the central banks is as follows. In the baseline scenario, 2021 will be registered 4.5% inflation. In the optimistic scenario, this figure is 4%, and in the negative scenario, it stands at 7%.
And as we mentioned in the beginning of the short review, NBG also provides for the outlook of unemployment. And here the central bank tells us that by the baseline scenario, we should be ready for 1% growth in unemployment. Optimistic scenario would mean the unemployment to be maintained at the current level. And in the pessimistic scenario, growth in unemployment would amount to 2.5%.
Okay, let us work and hope. Let us work and hope that we'll get through these quite tough times without any additional pessimism in the economy.
Work is a key word here, indeed, Georgi, and probably you will agree that tourism revival could dissipate this pessimism the most. So let us see how the entrepreneur Revaz Uturgauri puts all the attempt to fight pessimism and bring in more tourists.
I am crazy.
Despite this crisis and difficult situation, we think that Georgia should have a bright future.
Georgia will definitely have a good future when people think about constant development, people who do not give up and try to create something new. I'm not going to talk about Jonathan Livingstone here, but I must introduce you to different kinds of seagulls that fly in the sky without wings and are not afraid of the flow of the air.
If this project is successful in Georgia, it will be a unique winter project on air balloon flying over the mountains.
Let's start. I will tell you a story that begins in the skies of Georgia. Exclusively for our viewers, you are now watching the attempt to take off the air balloon, which starts from Ananuri in the direction of Kakheti.
This is a plan. You can see it. Checkpoints from Lagodehi, Dedopliskaro or Washlovani.
Our respondent is Revaz Uturgauri, founder of Modern Aeronautics and 5-time Georgian record holder. Revaz leaves other big things on the ground for a while and goes in a new direction, this time up in the air. He does not give in to the crisis and looks for another way to try and develop tourism at an altitude of 1,000 feet.
Look up in the sky at least once, it's better there. Sit in our flying basket and you will see what our Georgia looks like from the skies.
From up there, our Georgia is beautiful. There is no arguing about that. The land is good too, but with the help of even more actively involved people, it could be even better. I'll tell you a story from an altitude of 4,000 meters from the air balloon that has flown over the Caucasus. This is an aircraft registered in the Georgian Civil Aviation, and all ships and passengers are insured when a commercial flight takes place. No incidents have occurred in 16 years. It is safe, and it leaves you with an amazing feeling. In Georgia, modern aeronautics has existed since 2005. Sky Travel has been operating tourist flights over Georgia for 15 years. The main seasons of air balloon flying are spring and autumn. However, in some countries, flying is possible in winter, and Georgia is one of them. Anna Nuri Alazani Valley route, which runs from 3,000 to 3,500 meters above sea level, allows flight without an oxygen supply. Flight direction is from 103 to 132 degrees with a distance of 200 kilometers, which is quite ample space for maneuvering. At the same time, the beauty of the landscapes on which route runs makes the flight incredibly attractive. This will be a unique product because there are pilots in the world who look forward to collecting such flights. For example, they fly from Alps to Italy. This activity attracts more tourists and pilots, and we hope that they will come here too. The route is a completely new, unique product for the Georgian winter tourist season, which is an additional impetus for the development of local inbound tourism, and in general, a novelty in the tourist world for the awareness of our country. An air balloon has landed, and we can now hear the emotions felt in the air on Kakhetian soil.
Everything went well. We went up to 5,000 meters and covered a total of about 100 kilometers. The time we spent was about 4 hours. Most importantly, our journey was completely safe.
Such were the holidays when we, for our viewers, were able to provide with exclusive information that another and very cool direction of tourism is emerging in Georgia. Georgia invites tourists to the sky, providing a culture shock, which is on the upper edge of the land of Georgia. From there, the Caucasus is at the heart of the Georgian land, which seems to know no borders. The further the seagull flies, the further it sees. Revaz and his team have looked far up in the sky and found themselves to a point of no limitations.
A great initiative indeed, Elena. And before we say goodbye to our viewers and followers and leave them off with your exclusive interview with Mercedes Vera Martin, an already former head of mission in Georgia of IMF, let us give some background on IMF's performance.
Yes, Georgi, we have a very good video on how the IMF has helped address the pandemic 1 year on.
Watch it. So we'll say goodbye for now and let you enjoy the conversation with Mercedes Vera Martin. All the best, Mercedes.
Yes, and don't forget to follow us on BMG and Forbes.g till Sunday, 10 p.m. sharp.
See you.
Welcome to the show, dear Mercedes. You have concluded your term as the IMF mission head in Georgia. Thank you for all your efforts for my country, and also thank you for this interview.
Thank you very much, Alain, for the invitation. It's very nice to be here. And I'm very sad to leave my tenure on Georgia. It has been a really nice experience.
And we will talk about that in a little while. But before that, on March 8th, you attended a virtual meeting with the finance minister, Ivan Majavariani, where we read that the sides reviewed the agenda of cooperation between the International Monetary Fund and Georgia, the progress on IMF's financing mechanism, and also made a focus on monetary and fiscal fiscal policy of the country in 2021. So my first question would be, how would you assess your tenure, and also what would you call the biggest achievement and also the biggest challenge in IMF support to Georgia?
I feel very honored to have worked on Georgia for the last 4 years. And I think everybody, all the stakeholders in the public sector and the private sector, donors and also the IMF feel very, very rewarded by the experience of the last 4 years. In the context of the IMF, we have a 4-year program under the Enhanced Fund Facility where we provided almost $600 million to help the authorities assess development needs and build resilience in the economy towards external shock. It's very difficult to highlight one achievement in particular because I think there have been many achievements. They have been a strengthening of the macro frameworks. They the authorities have also built buffers and have adhered to the macro policies. So focusing on only one point will not reach well. It doesn't undermine others. What it has been striking, I think, in the context of the pandemic, which definitely has become the biggest challenge for all economies around the world, is the capacity of Georgia to develop a policy support program that have been able to limit the impact of the pandemic on households and families, and also on the economy in general.
On the monetary side, probably you are still following news on Georgia, and you know that NBG just raised the financing rate by 50 basis points to 8.5%. The reason for that was the spillover effect, among many others, was also the spillover effect of lari depreciation on inflation and prices. Well, we all know that tightening monetary policy is not good for the economic growth, to put it very simply for our viewers. And on the other hand, the economy cannot fully open up because there are still risks that are related to COVID situation, and we do not know whether there is any third wave of COVID-19 pandemic in Georgia or globally. And we also are in the situation when the number of businesses in the lockdown are growing, who are questing for subsidies or some kind of tax breaks. What should be the standpoint of the government in kind of managing this quite tough situation?
So you raise a very good point. I think it's very important at this point to have a very, very strong policy coordination, and we have seen it in the economic team. A lot of coordination in monetary and fiscal policy. Monetary policy have tightened because inflation expectations have been increasing, and you have the risk of higher inflation by the end of the year. Inflation affects mostly the vulnerable and reduce the purchasing power for poor families mainly. So it is important to manage inflation and to make sure that inflation doesn't get an anchor over the course of the year. And we know from past experience that exchange rate pass-through to inflation in the case of Georgia is very high. So I think that there are risks of higher inflation by the end of the year, and monetary policy will need to tighten. In terms of where we are in dealing with the economic impact of the pandemic, our approach and the authorities' approach have been consulting with us has been we need to use fiscal policy more proactively to support the economy. That's why in 2020 we formulated together with the authorities a package of almost 4% of GDP to help the business and the households. Also to increase capital spending so that jobs could be maintained and in the sector, and that generates synergies to the private sector also. Going forward in 2021, that policy support is remaining, at least for the first half of the year. I think the big question will be, as we are seeing the economy will be recovering in 2021, how we just smooth or balance the withdrawal of the policy stimulus with the private sector and private sector demand coming as a source of growth for Georgia.
Yes, that seems a very big question indeed, because Standard & Poor's also said recently that today's figure for the debt, which currently stands at around 63% of GDP, might rise by almost 6 percentage points. And this is because of the expectations for lari depreciation in future, and also new debt that can be accumulated by the government. What is your take on that? That's my first question. And the second question, when you already mentioned that at least that we are seeing the signs that 2021 could not be the year of recovery. When should this fiscal consolidation start that you have been accentuating in our previous interviews?
So let me clarify by starting to say we are seeing 2021 as a year for recovery. There will be recovery this year. Yes, the economy will grow. Yes, because also the impact of the pandemic in 2020 was significantly large, right? So we are seeing this year recovering. We are seeing vaccinations, the campaigns starting not only in Georgia, but also around the rest of the world. And so that will have a pickup in demand.
Yeah, so you wouldn't call it like a transition year. You are still calling it a recovery year.
It's a recovery year. We are projecting positive growth this year. So we are expecting the economy to start recovering. Now, we are now going back to GDP levels seen in 2019, for example. It will take a little bit of time. We are expecting a gradual recovery in terms of GDP for Georgia, as we are projecting for many of the countries, right? So, for example, the fact that tourism sector we are not projecting a recovery in tourism sector to the 2019 levels until 2022, 2023. We are just hoping that there will be a gradual recovery in tourism. Will take a little bit of time for the economy to recover to GDP levels seen in 2019. But we are seeing a recovery this year. And the challenge will be, okay, as you are recovering and the rest of the global economy is recovering, and we are seeing that in advanced economies, our growth performance have been much stronger than the growth projections that we have for the end of 2020. As the global economy recovers, you could see a rapid decrease in global demand, and that will help Georgia to grow through exports, right? So, you know, in that process, and depending how quickly domestic and external demand pick up, the authorities will need to calibrate the withdrawal of the policy support that have been provided for the pandemic. In terms of the debt dynamics, I'm not sure how Standard & Poor's come about the calculations of the increase in 6 percentage points of GDP due to the lari depreciation. It seems a little bit large in my mind, because you have 2/3 of your public debt in external debt in FX, and that will require a significant magnitude of the depreciation of the exchange rate that we are not seeing in the markets at the moment. You know, at the same time, I think the central bank has been very proactive in trying to avoid excessive volatility in the exchange rate for several reasons. And that's good, but we don't see significant pressures in the FX market at the moment towards lari depreciation.
Lari is a very interesting topic nowadays, because recently head of the Parliamentary Committee on Economy and Economic Policy, David Sunkulashvili, he said, and let me quote him directly, that we need some type of new specific action plan for the lari stability and specific steps perhaps in coordination with the NBG. Unfortunately, we do not know any specifics what he meant specifically under these words, because we see tightening of the monetary policy. We also see selling reserves, which indirectly is also having an impact on the FX market as well. What's there else that could be used as a tool for the exchange market stability? That's my first question. And also another question is it wise to question in any way right now the floating exchange rate?
Let me start by saying that the Larry has always been a very important issue in Georgia. It's not only now.
That's a very true comment.
Yeah. But I mean, our position has been very clear. I think, Georgia is a small, open economy, is vulnerable to external shocks. It needs the exchange rate flexibility, because it needs the exchange rate to play the role of the shock absorber. I think, of course, you don't want excessive volatility, and that's what I think what the central bank has tried to prevent as a result of the pandemic shock. That's why it has been intervening. But you need exchange rate flexibility in Georgia. I don't think that having an stable exchange rate will help. What you need are policies that help you to allow the exchange rate to have a full role as a shock absorber. Policies about reducing dollarization in the economy will be very helpful, because they will help your monetary policy to be more effective and the exchange rate to be more flexible. If people don't earn dollars, they should not borrow in dollars, because there are risks associated to borrowing in dollars. So I think the idea and our reasoning has been, you need an exchange rate that is flexible. Let's strengthen the monetary framework so that and reduce that dollarization, so that you can effectively have an exchange rate that can work as a shock absorber. And I think it's very important here that the central bank independence in the conduct of monetary policy and in the conduct of its mandate is preserved on a permanent basis.
And today we see that there are also fundamental factors that are interfering with Larry, and they have become factors for the depreciation.
Maybe you can elaborate on these fundamental factors, because I'm not sure what you are referring to. And the second thing is, we don't project
exports and
I see.
all
Okay.
these sources that bring in.
No, of course.
Yes, currency to the country.
Okay, now that's clear. No, of course, you have a massive shock in 2020. You have Georgia being an economy that has been where exports and tourism has been great sources of FX, right? And that dry up during 2020. So as the economy recovered, you will see a normalization of the FX flows, and hopefully you will see also the central bank having to play less of a role in the provision of foreign exchange in the coming years.
And another factor here is also FDI, because we have seen drastic figures for FDI, which is very significantly down. What could be rational expectations for FDI figures and FDI's role in the overall economic structure of the country in coming years, when we see that the impact of pandemic is tough not only on Georgia but also on other countries as well, and what could be found as such quick way, so to say, for the economic growth?
So this is a very good question, because yes, FDI flows have decreased significantly in 2020. It has happened globally. Georgia has also not been different from the rest of the country. I think it's important that as the economy recovers, special efforts are put in place to attract FDI. You are in a location that can be very attractive between East and West, and we have talked in the past about Georgia being at the crossroad, and the fact that you have a free trade agreement with China and also with the European Union can help some companies find location advantages by being placed in Georgia. And for an economy like Georgia, you don't need to bring very big companies. I mean, those are welcome and they bring a lot of know-how, but you also can bring a small, medium-sized enterprises, right? That can bring a lot of know-how and will have a significant impact in Georgia. So I think, you know, promoting the location, promoting the free trade agreements that you have, continue to benefit from a very strong business environment. You know, Georgia ranks very well across countries in the world in terms of how easy it is to create a company, get a permit, you know, pay taxes. Those are advantages for companies when they are looking at where to locate in the world. I think from the pandemic, what we learned is that there have been significant supply shocks, supply disruption. So what we are seeing is maybe companies or sectors are thinking more about developing regional value chains rather than global value chains. So here you are going to see probably more of regional value chains. And here I think Georgia can also benefit from that and attract investment. Definitely, you need FDI.
You also mentioned that this pandemic had the worst impact on the poor population, including in Georgia, of course. And we can see this in figures. In just 1 year, we have 100,000 more people that are now under poverty line. Is there a room for the economy to be inclusive without the growth rates like even what Georgia had in 2019? And also, do you think this is the time to have more targeted programs which will be targeted to these poor people rather than having some kind of universal approach?
No, this is a very important question and a big challenge, not only for Georgia, but also for the rest of the world. In terms of what we are seeing in Georgia, the impact on the poor is harder because there are no buffers. They don't have savings to draw from when they are not allowed to work. It's quite a challenging situation. During 2020, in the context of our program with the authorities, actually, we some of the support that has been provided have been targeted to families with low income and to families that have lost their jobs and to people working in the informal sector that cannot do their jobs anymore because of the containment measures and the limits on mobility that needed to be imposed. We see a social assistance program in Georgia well targeted. I mean, we have used it in the past to increase support to the old, to the sick, to children. And I think continuing to focus the help on those that most need that help will be important in the future.
I just have to mention it here because you cannot do without this is the context that Georgia is currently in. Of course, I'm not asking you to comment in any way on current political situation, but I'm bringing this example of political polarization because I want to read out one more quote, and this is the direct quote from the European Council statement following the 6th Association Council meeting between EU and Georgia. And let me read the quote. The Association Council welcomed the disbursements of macrofinancial assistance to Georgia in November 2020 and urged Georgia to continue the implementation of outstanding agreed policy measures in order to enable the disbursement of the second installment of the COVID macro financial assistance to Georgia, which 75 million euro was already disbursed in 2020. The EU encouraged Georgia to ensure the sustainability of already implemented reforms and maintain macroeconomic stability. And the special emphasis is again on rule of law, and which has been on the agenda of structural reforms of the IMF constantly for Georgia. And also there is an urge to have a reform on state-owned enterprises, which we already heard from you in our several interviews. What would be your thoughts on this in this short-term context? Will Georgia need this money to alleviate all the problems that we have in economy during this period, and due to lockdowns and also constraints of the mobility, which you also mentioned, because even those businesses do not fully benefit who are now to some extent open.
When we assessed last time the situation of the Georgian economy in 2000, at the end of 2020, we identified significant financing needs, external financing needs for 2021. They are around $1 billion. When we worked together with our partners and with the Georgian authorities and the donor community, we put together a package that allowed for that financing to be fulfilled. And that takes into account the macro financial assistance from the European Union. It's very important that the authorities do the reforms that are aligned with that disbursement. And it's important to get this financing because it allows to have for the authorities and the fiscal authorities to execute fully on the budget. Then, I know as a side effect, you also build up reserves, which are very important at this point. In terms of the reforms, so we have one more review to go for the conclusion of this program. It will happen sometime in April. There is some conditionality like we have in every review, and one part or one element of the commitment of the authorities in terms of reforms is to prepare a strategy for the reforms of the state-owned enterprises. This has been discussed with the authorities. There have been some publication of reports about what needs to be done. And the core principle that we are working here is that a state-owned enterprise needs to have good governance. Right? So the idea is to strengthen the governance of the SOEs. We are discussing with the authorities the element of that agenda, and we hope that afterwards it's not an immediate reform. It takes time to do this kind of reforms. They can start implementing in the near years.
It is very interesting here. What are some of the options for reaching this goal that you mentioned with state-owned enterprises? Is it a privatization process? Is it some kind of PPP projects? What's being discussed on the table? If that's okay to air it.
So our fiscal affairs department has been providing technical assistance, and we have not reached the step. We are not here to tell any authorities whether they should privatize or whether they should keep state-owned enterprises. There is principles in the provision, for example, of public goods, where you need state-owned enterprises because you will not have private sector coming to provide a specific public good that is needed for society. We are at the stage where we are discussing or have been discussing with the authorities how to strengthen the governance. So making sure that state-owned enterprises are run on a commercial basis, that they are accountability and transparency in the way business are done, that that they are well-run companies, so that contingent liabilities to their budget are limited. And in that sense, I think in Georgia, the efforts have been quite significant in terms of trying to understand what are the contingent liabilities that a state-owned enterprise could pose to the budget.
We hear so often lately that Georgia is yet again on crossroads to its development. Do you think that momentum is there, and what should Georgia take as a signal and not let it go?
So we have talked about this for many years, and yes, Georgia in itself geographically is at a crossroad between east and west, and that gets reflected also in their economy. I mean, this is a middle-income country that needs to develop further, and we have been discussing in the past with you. The aim will be to get emerging market status, right, and try to continue increasing income and increasing the wealth and spreading that wealth to promote inclusive growth. I don't think there will be a signal that will tell you, okay, from now on, this will happen.
So that's
I wish. I think what is important and something that we have seen in the past years have been, keep the momentum for reform. We have been discussing the need to increase the resilience of the economy to shocks. For that, you need to increase fundamentals. So you need more capital, you need more investment, you need a stronger human capital. And we have been discussing the education reform with authorities. We have been discussing it with our partners, international partners like the World Bank. You need to strengthen, and that will help you to diversify and increase your production base. And something that I really admire from the different counterparts that I have the privilege to engage with in my tenure in Georgia is that there is a very strong commitment to reform, and there is a strong commitment to seek prosperity in Georgia. And that's from the public, but also from the private sector.
Let me just add here that there is no question that Georgia needs to stick very closely to its Euro-Atlantic aspirations, because this is crucial for our economic security and also for our well-being in the long run. And another crossroads also that I see right now it's the vaccination process. We have started and this vaccination process with AstraZeneca, but what we see right now is that misinformation is working, unfortunately, like in any other country. There are doubts around this vaccine, and the pace of vaccination is quite low, unfortunately. Despite the fact that neither me nor you are epidemiologists here, and we acknowledge this to the full extent, I would your thoughts on this process would be still useful for my country at this stage. I have talked with Mr. Jihad Azur from the IMF recently, and he said that accelerating vaccination is the way to open up the economy. Your thoughts on that, please?
Thank you, Ellen. As you said, we are not epidemiologists, but I mean, definitely any country wants to get herd immunity as soon as possible, right? So I think getting the vaccination campaign implemented in an efficient way, people going and getting vaccinated will be very important. It's the only way we have to go to what people call the new normal, but probably to go back to normal, hopefully. So that we don't have to, countries do not have to implement new containment measures. And we can restore the economic channels that have been disrupted during the last year. I follow the news. I know that some countries have stopped the vaccination process with AstraZeneca. I listen to news that also say that the risks are very minor. I think it's very important to continue with that vaccination process and also think about alternatives. Getting herd immunity as soon as possible will allow Georgia to restore economic activity sooner rather than later, and that's very important. Also because you have an economy that in the past has depended a lot of tourism. And I have no doubt that tourism will recover. I don't know anybody who doesn't want to travel after being 1 year at home.
Exactly. If you could tell Georgia's story during this 4 years of your tenure, what would be the main figures for Georgia, for you, and also the main reforms undertaken or started during these 4 years?
So I think one of the biggest achievements was to be able to have prudent macro policies that allow Georgia to build buffers and to put a very policy response or support when the pandemic hit. Where Georgia, when I came into Georgia, there was macroeconomic stability, but the composition of the budget, for example, was geared towards current spending. We have, the authorities shifted to capital investment, and they have been able to advance some of the major infrastructure projects. There is also a lot of achievements in terms of strengthening macro framework. So there have been significant achievements in terms of tax administration, improving tax administration, strengthen the budget process, and the fiscal rule, for example, was revised and have been strengthened, and is a good anchor in terms of how fiscal policy should be conducted in the coming years. On the monetary financial sector side, there have been also significant improvements in terms of strengthening the resilience of the financial sector to shock. There have been prudent macro prudential policies that have allowed to reduce FX mix matches in the household sectors. Those were welcome because they generate risk for financial stability. The authorities also revised, for example, or put in place a resolution framework that is in line with best practice. So there have been a lot of reforms, and all of them add to building the resilience of this economy to shock. This economy needs jobs for the people, and you want people to be able to participate in economic activity, and not mostly in the informal sector. You want them in the formal sector, and you want to be part of the economic activity of the country.
How was working in Georgia different from other from other experiences of your professional career?
Yeah. So, this has been, I think, the most rewarding professional experience that I have so far. And my career has been long at the IMF, but really I came to love Georgia. I think a few things I highlight that experience has been, it's really impressive, how engaged the authorities are. And how engaged others are in the economic process, in the reform program, and how much impact you can have in the discussions. We have a very productive dialogue with the authorities, with the private sector, in terms of discussing priorities for reforms, in terms of implementing reforms. I think also something that is very different in Georgia to other countries is the amount of donor support. You have a lot of international partners, and this is an opportunity that not many other countries benefit from. It's really impressive to see how many friends Georgia has in the international community. And when the package last year, we put the package in terms of the policy response in May for the pandemic, having this collaboration with international partners and being able in a very short period of time to mobilize financing for this country is really something that I admire. But that reflects how the Georgians are, right? And how committed you are to your country and the prosperity of your country. And that is something that I really admire.
What did this experience of working in Georgia give you personally, Mercedes Veromati?
So, first of all, it gave me the opportunity to explore and to get to know this wonderful country. the culture, the food, the wine. I'm Spaniard. We do celebrate everything around food and meals and family, and you discovered these wonderful supras, and that has been really rewarding. You also build friendships, and I feel sorry not to be in Tbilisi or not having the opportunity to go to Tbilisi at the moment, because I want to see my friends in Georgia. And definitely you have also a beautiful country. I have the opportunity to travel a little bit around the country, because you just cannot go, you cannot be in Georgia and not trying to explore the beauty of this country. So I really hope I can go to Georgia as soon as possible.
Yes, and we hope to see you here, here as well. Wish you all the success in your new job. And thank you for taking our questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. It has been really wonderful to work with you and your colleagues in Forbes and to have this wonderful relation with you. And I really hope all the best for you, all the best for Georgia, and we hope to see you soon in Tbilisi, hopefully.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.